Yo, 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 what's going on, you guys? It's your boy 360 Stacks. Thank you, Lord Jesus. In this thing, baby, representing TKOG. And today, you guys, I'm going to be coming at you with something super different. It's been a long time since I've shown you guys true Draco content on my channel. If you followed the channel for a while, especially back in the glory days, in like Trinity format, I call it Trinity format. Really, it was like Eternal format. Which is like literally to this day probably my favorite format in the history of the game. I remember Sky Strikers were just so crazy, and Danger Thunder was just so crazy, and Pendulum was just running rampant, and I was playing Blind Second Dracos. I was playing Blind Second Dracos, Blind Second Sky Striker, and Blind Second Infernoids. Those were the only, decks that I felt comfortable just blind seconding with, because I just felt like their engines just dealt so well with the boards that are being established at that time, and their one-for-one trades, like economically this deck is just on par with some other decks that really can snowball, but also they can maintain that advantage that they start with, and it just builds as a surplus instead of it just constantly being a break-even kind of thing. And I also just really like the aspect of using the effects of spells and trap cards to break my opponent's boards versus activating them, because a lot of the interruptions that people were setting up at that time, only if they were negate, they only negated activations of like monster effects or spells and traps, and most of the time people really didn't have counterplay game one for what my deck could do, and I would just break their board, set up floodgates, and just have like constant pressure, constant follow-up, and consistent spot removal to keep them from reestablishing. And it was just so insane. Like, there was just not a lot of cards that really did anything to this deck. Like, Dark Ruler didn't do anything. Nibiru didn't do anything. Super Poly was actually at, like, 2 at that time, but it didn't matter. It was just, like, and even now, like, I'm talking about that format, but even now, when I considered everything that's being played, I was like, dang, there's, like, just not a lot of counterplay for what Dracos can do. Like, a card that could be really good if people are just able to establish it, like, and I think Tears can make it, and I can't really think of, oh yeah, and Draco Slayers. I think Tears and Draco Slayers right now are the most popular decks that can make Dweller. Outside of Dweller, there's not really a lot of cards that can just prevent this deck from doing what it does extremely well. I think against Runic Sprite as well, like, this deck is actually pretty crazy against the Runic decks. It just has such consistent pressure, and it's able to just check so many different engines that people are playing, and there's just like not a lot that people can do to stop this deck from just getting its engine going. There's not a lot of hand traps that work. In fact, hand trapping this deck, especially when you have like a Draco monster up, it just feels like a -1 because they just get advantage because you hand trap them. And I'm playing a Mono Iwado, which is a throwback. I love this card so much. It's an insane card, it really is. I mean, there's memes about this card, like Amano activate Raigeki, and Raigeki's at 3, and I wanted to be funny and just play 3 Raigeki just because of the combo, but I wanted my board breakers to be able to be versatile and to be utilized in more applications than just simply doing what it does. Like, Raigeki only does one thing, and I considered, okay, instead of Raigeki, why not play Stormforth, because this deck does struggle with getting over cards that can be targeted or destroyed. And it also is another layer of disruption that I can just use as part of my inboard. And the same with Strike of the Monarchs. So this is actually true Draco Monarchs. There's a lot of theory behind it. And ultimately, at first, I was just playing pure true Dracos. And I played like all the good spells that I could play. And I was going to do like 2 TC Boo, 2 Goes into Rivalry, and like 3 Skill Drain, 3 Monarchs Erupt, you know, in the main deck, but I decided to just not even use that many floodgates. I just really wanted to just let my opponent just play solitaire, and I just wanted to break their board with Draco cards and then just pressure them with engine, because the deck actually is really good at doing that. Like, people haven't played against this deck in such a long time that they actually just forgot how good this deck is, and they really don't respect it. So this is like a really funny thing, because like, people don't know how to interact with these cards. Like, people have really forgotten how strong Dracos are, and there's not a lot of engines right now that can really stop this deck from doing what it's doing. Like, a lot of spot removal just doesn't work against this deck, and most of its cards do something else, and you just have such good recursion and stability, and the deck's really consistent. It can play any floodgate in the entire game of Yu-Gi-Oh! without any drawbacks, and it has so much draw power that just if you open like 2 floodgates plus like access to Strike of the Monarchs, it's just like an FDK. So let's get started. That's kind of like the synopsis. There's just so much layered into this. This is not like I'm just gonna go and win worlds with this deck. It's like more of like a for fun idea, but it has a lot of potential, and I don't think that it's a bad deck at all. I think that it just really literally got overshadowed and power crept by so many other new like decks. Like people would rather play like Eldritch or Labyrinth at this point than Draco, because Draco's just so old. But I really think that it's one of the best stun decks that you can play. I just don't play it in that aspect. I've always loved Dracos as just a going second deck. They're just so good. They really are. So we're playing 3 in mono. This is better than like Dark Ruler and like Imperm and like Drop It's, any combination of both. There's not a lot of counterplay to this card. Like this card forces like Smashers preemptively. This preemptively forces like Solic. It's just so crazy how cracked this card is. It's so broke. And it just if they don't have no counterplay to it or like nothing that stops it, then it literally just turns their whole board off. All their hand traps are dead. All their monsters can't activate, and you can just do whatever you want. And by the time this returns to your hand, there's going to be nothing left to even activate. It's just so insane. It stops Droll if people try to side Droll against you. It's broken. It's literally like a walking skill drain every turn. It's so oppressive. I am on Stormforth. This is because I'm playing the Monarch engine in my Dracos. This is extremely searchable, and it's just such a good interruption. It's so powerful. Like Stormforth to this day is just unbelievable how good of a card it is when you're actually able to play it in a decent deck that can utilize it without like breaking all the time. Like the pure Monarch deck like has amazing spells and traps, but it's just not consistent. And I think that Dracos are far more consistent, and they have more applications that are not even niche. They have more applications that are unique, using the variants like with the interactions that the Monarch spells and traps provide. I think they honestly do more for this deck than they do for their own deck, which is kind of sad to say because they do belong to the Monarch archetype. But Dracos just utilize them better, have a more consistent engine, can play a lot more non-engine, and don't care about hand traps to like a large margin. I mean, like, it's really hard to hand trap this deck in the first place, and there's just like not a lot of hand traps that just work. Like, you pretty much just have to like have Ash for spells, and if you don't even play Ash, if you're on like Imperm and Nib and Veiler and Ghost Mourner and DD Crow and Bell and all those other trash hand traps, they just don't work. Like, Super Poly never really comes up, Droplets rarely does, and even at that point, by the time you've got Dracos on the field, you've already taken so many cards from your opponent that sometimes you're targeting the Droplet with one of your Draco spells, and they're just forcing them to activate it because they're going to lose anyways. So there's just like so much non-engine staples that are being played right now that just are not good against this deck. Like, you can kill the Kostrila before you even activate a monster effect. Like, you're breaking boards with the effects of spells or traps, so you're not even activating them. So half the time, most negates don't even work against this deck, and that's including when you summon a mono. It's just so good. But Stormforth and Strike and like a mono in mine are like my quote-quote going second cards. Really, the entire deck can go second. Like, the entire engine, every card that's not the 3 erupts and the domain in certain instances, all are able to just crack boards. So you really don't play technically allocated slots for going second cards because the entire deck's engine can just pressure boards. And going first, you set up consistent spot removal, and just it's so aggressive, and it has so much draw power and so much recursion, and it's just so annoying. Like, nobody likes playing against this deck. So Stormforth, like I was saying, is just so amazing. It solves a major problem that I know can be a big deal. Like, if a monster can be targeted or destroyed, there's no way I can get over it on turn 1. You would have to like flip skill drain and pray they can't stop it. And Stormforth guarantees to bait a negate. It trades extremely well. It's so good. And when they don't have a negate, when you're tributing their monster for a summon, like, tier cards don't float. It's just so good. Strike, I like this card a lot. This is actually one of my favorite techs. I've always played this in my True Dracos. Like, I've played 2 minimum. Most of the time I've played 3. I think this card is insane. It solves a lot of problems. The fundamental like problem with playing like stun decks or decks that utilize spells and traps or purple cards more than other decks is like spell or trap removal is more impactful against your deck than it is any other deck, and sometimes you just literally just lose to those cards. But Strike of the Monarch, actually can just negate any face-up card on the field. So it can negate Lightning Storm, it can negate Evenly, it can negate Runic Destruction, it can hit Twin or Cosmic, it can hit Sulic. It hits like so many cards. Like it's actually absurd how powerful this card is, and you get to draw in the process. And its graveyard effect actually comes up in certain matchups because you can actually change the attributes of all face-up monsters on the field. So it's pretty gnarly what Strike can do. That also kind of comes up somewhat if tier players are putting up Mud Dragon and declaring an attribute, and then like Mud Dragon protects all monsters with that attribute from targeting. So your Draco traps wouldn't actually technically be able to like pop anything, so it makes it harder to break their board. But if you have Strike, you can just change your attributes to something random and dumb that never comes up, and then just pop their cards anyways. So there's like a lot of, like I was saying, like niche kind of variable interactions with the Monarch spells and traps that are make them problem-solving cards and multi-purpose cards at the same time. And they're a part of the Monarch engine, which means it gives me draw power, and it gives me just a level of utility that the Dracos don't really have on their own. Dracos really just pop cards and draw cards. That's like the bare bone of the engine, like the bare bone, like I would say like the what's the word I'm looking for? The foundation of the engine is really just kind of predicated to literally just drawing and popping cards. And that's all they really can do. That's why you normally have to play Floodgates, because their interruptions aren't enough. But like you have interruptions through spot removal, you have negations, you have Floodgates, and you have like so much draw power, and that's a combination that makes this deck a lot better than it was back then, because I wasn't playing the Monarch cards and I didn't really see the potential until not too long ago. So I really like this list. I really like what it can do. I'm just playing the seven Draco monsters. As we all know, Knuckles came back off the ban list, so he's totally free. We're just waiting on Master Penis. Hopefully one day he does come. This deck has an insane mind game. I know that people play outs, but you cannot outmind with this deck by like trying to control no monsters, because like you can always just flip return, bring your monster back so mine can't die. And then you also can always Apocalypse pop your own monster so that you control none, so that mine is completely on at all times. So this deck has like an insane mind game, and it can't be decked out because of true Draco Disciples. So you also cannot Mystic Mine this deck, even if you somehow protect your mind from being destroyed by the spells and traps that you're always sending to the grave, like literally like on your turn or your opponent's turn. For my starters, quote, I'm playing 3 Pantheism. It is better than Pot of Greed in this deck. It is literally a +2. The card lets you net 2 free cards for no reason, and even if it gets hand trapped, negated, or ashed, you can just banish it and then just trade with another negate. So going second with Pantheism, even though it's a quote -1, it stabilizes that, and it really does mitigate like a lot of interruptions on it, because when it gets negated, you just banish it and you can just reveal cards that your opponent has to negate. So when you think about it, this card always trades with 2 negates bare minimum, and if not, then you just like get so much value out of it. And it kind of gets out of control once you resolve this card, because Dracos already get so far ahead on their own, but when you're resolving a card like Pantheism, it's just a little bit too much, especially because your 1-for-1s that trade with your opponent's cards and break their board naturally replace themselves, and it's just kind of insane. Like, this is like the Engage of the deck, but it's in this deck, it's better than Engage because it can trade with negates a lot better, and it's not even once per turn on activation. It's kind of crazy. 3 Duality, we're just digging forever. Duality is just infamously good in Dracos. I do play Demise still. I play the Terraforming, the Set Rotation, and the Diagram because it's at 1. So this gives me 3 Diagrams. I do play Mine and Domain as additional targets for Set and Terra. It doesn't really matter which field spell you give your opponent because you can always just pop it anyways. Mine doesn't work against this deck regardless. And then for more starters, I play 3 Tenacity. This is not only going to work with Ignis, but also it's just another great target for Pantheism. If you're going to play the Pantheism package, like the Monarch package, you want to play like the better Monarch spells or traps. You don't just want to throw Monarch spells or traps in your deck just so that you can play Pantheism. You want to play cards that can do things on their own without you having to like draw Pantheism with them. So like what I'm really saying is like you don't just play Pantheism as a package and just throw a bunch of random targets in. You play Pantheism as more of like an icing on the cake. It's like I don't need this card for these cards to work, but this card makes these cards a lot more valuable and powerful in the deck. So like I played the best targets. I played Monarchs Erupt, Tenacity, Strike, Stormforth, and Domain. All these cards on their own do something ridiculous. It's just crazy. Tenacity is just so much free real estate, you guys. Card's so gross. It's so free plus. It's insane. Like, your boards now have searchable protection against counterplay post-siding for any type of back row hate. And people don't really side a lot of back row hate in the first place. Red Reboot is banned. And people really don't respect trap decks. They don't respect purple cards. They might side 3 evenly or a couple Cosmics for like a mine out. They respect mine more than they respect the entire like trap deck. So even if they draw one of their like 3 side deck cards, because they mostly side for combo, Strike is going to trade with it, and Strike's searchable through 6 other cards, and you have insane draw power. So you're either going to draw into it or search it. You have like quote quote 9 copies of Strike, but you really can just dig into it way more consistently than that, because again, so much draw power. And then like the rest of the Draco engine, I play 3 of every single spell or trap. There's a really cool tech that you guys can mess around with. It's a really old card. I mess around with this sometimes. I just think it's so funny. You can play Twister and like send one of your Draco spells or traps on the field and just get 2 pops for no reason. And because it's not once per turn, it's kind of crazy. It's just like something you can do. I wouldn't do it. I would play again, like I'd play Stormforth or Strike over that first, because like again, these have applications going first and second, but that card literally only does stuff going second. And if you can see, a lot of the cards that I use going second to break boards are also used to either progress my game state going first, or they're interruptions, or cards that insulate like hand traps and blowouts. Like Amano, if you summon Amano turn 1, like literally your opponent, if they want to hand trap you, they have to have imperm, and then they can hand trap you after that. And even then, it's so neg, because once you get Draco monsters on field and your opponent starts trying to hand trap you, they just give you free real estate. Like, they stop a play and give you an outlet to a whole nother play. So again, the deck's just so good against hand traps, doesn't lose to Super Poly, doesn't really care about Dark Ruler Droplet. You can counterplay Lightning Storm and Evenly extremely well. It can play any Floodgate, and it has more draw power than any other stun deck in the game. So you're going to see multiple Floodgates all the time. Like, this deck will just like auto win going first. But because I blind second, I just have the mindset that they're probably going to make me go first, and they're just going to side in like, like spell or trap removal. And that's why like I feel like your side deck can be any Floodgates you want. You can just do like pairs of 2 on all of them because you draw so much, but you definitely just want to like have like an insane going first. I even also would recommend with this deck, even though it sounds counterintuitive, to sideboard into cards like Shifter, so that you cannot be eradicated. And even though Shifter would prevent your Draco cards from getting their graveyard effects, you have to think about it. There's not really anything that you would want to pop. If your opponent's under Shifter, they're not playing, so there's no board to break because there's no board being made, and it's going to be live again. Like, these cards are going to be live again, and by the time Shifter wears out, you're not going to let your opponent play anyways, because you're going to have Floodgates after that. So it's just crazy. It's really good. And lastly, the Erupts. I still like to main the Erupts, because like I just need something stronger to end on after I broke in my opponent's board. I thought about playing 2, but the reason why you want to play 3 ofs on all of the Monarch spells and traps is not only because they're good in their own right and they solve problems, but also so that Pantheism never has to do anything weird like reveal a Tenacity and like 2 of those and like hope that your opponent doesn't like see through the trick, because sometimes that doesn't work. You don't even have Ignis, or you might have already activated Tenacity. So like you just want to play 3 of all of them, so that Pantheism, no matter whether it's draw 2 gets negated or not, can always get you anything that you need at any time. And so like that's the mindset. You don't really care too much about Domain. I know it sounds crazy because it's an extra deck a lot, but you have other ways to search Domain as well. Like, so it's more of like a nice to have. It's like, again, it's a cherry on top, because like if you have Erupt in Domain, like your opponent literally has to have like Lightning Storm or Evenly. But if you searched out Strike, they're just not winning. They're just not winning. There's no way. They can't even like Pelorino to pop this, because they literally cannot summon from their extra deck. So it's insane. And the other cool interaction with Domain that people will definitely sleep on is like when you're playing against Runic, they can't like mind deck you out, because if you try and pop their mind, they can't just chain a Runic card and summon the Wings chick and protect, because they're locked out of their extra deck. So you literally cannot be decked out. You cannot be mined. Like, you can't be decked out because of this card. You can always Apocalypse pop your own monsters, so you literally can't even be Mystic Mind. And then you can do the same thing with mine that your opponent would try and do against you, but better. So you could even allocate more slots to play more mines, but again, you just have like already too many free like auto wins. And then against Flunder, this deck is just, it's stupid. Like this deck, it doesn't care about anything that Flunder does. Nothing that Flunder does matters against this deck. And if you just drop a mono, it doesn't even matter in the first place. Like there's literally nothing they can do anymore. None of their floodgates work. All they have really for playing against this deck is unexplored winds. And then Avion and Ryza are the only cards that work. Other than that, they just gain advantage, but they can't really out-resource this deck because a lot of the resources that they're gonna get don't do anything. So it's technically really not true value. Like if you have a bunch of cards and they don't do anything, it doesn't really feel like you have advantage. You know what I mean? Advantage really to me is just cards that can either progress your game state or prevent your opponent from playing. And if they just don't do anything, they're just blank cards. So this is also a really good counter pick for Flunder. It's a really good counter pick for like Tyr and Runic and Sprite. It's not the best deck, but it definitely is a deck that goes in and out of formats where there's just certain points in the meta where this deck is insane, and then there's other points in the meta where you just don't want to play it because there's too many decks that just will not let this deck thrive. But the format that we're in is definitely not one of those formats. This is definitely a good time for Draco to thrive. So thank you guys so much for watching the deck profile. I appreciate you guys. God bless you. Make good choices. Don't hurt your brain cells. Stay tuned for future content. If you guys want to see me be toxic and like play this on DB, I'm definitely down. I have a lot more time, so I'm gonna start getting some duels and replays for DB and getting commentating. Like I'm gonna be commentating over them, which I know you guys really miss. So thank you guys again and be safe. Alright, deuces.